How are you?
I'm good. It's my first Comic-Con.
Is it?
Yeah.
So, have you walked around and done everything?
No, I just flew in an hour before the panel. But tomorrow I'm going to nerd out.
Are you?
Yeah, I'll fanboy.
But are you going to dress up?
I wanted to bring my Stormtrooper costume, but it took so many bags to pack that I couldn't. I'm not even joking.
So what are you going to nerd out about?
Everything. I think Alien Covenant. I'm a huge Ridley Scott fan. I want to see if there's anything there. Star Trek, Star Wars. I don't know what's on the floor for that stuff. Some of the Superman, Batman next movies. I'm interested in the Ben Affleck directed and written and starring a lot. I think that's gonna be cool. What else? Jodorowsky's Dune.
Really?
I'm hoping it finally gets made. No.
So what can you say about the tone of Vampire?
Yeah, the tone is it's a great question because we are in a grounded, we're trying to make a grounded, realistic world where the threats are real, the characters are not too cartoony, or over the top. Although we do want the extremes of human relationship, and we feel like we can earn that in an extreme situation. So we have a good balance, I think, of the threat of vampires and the violence of vampires and the danger of them being kind of a grounded, realistic scenario where if this could happen and this did happen, how would it play out? So I have enough of that as a dose of universe building, of mythology, but we also are self-aware enough that the characters can have humor and the characters can be different enough that they spark off each other. So if there's any light tone, it's character from a character place. And then, I guess the audience will decide how our vampires are received tonally, because we don't know. We don't know what our choices were, how that will play out, because we have no idea. What we think is interesting and cool and different may not play that way. May come off camp, I don't know. So we sort of had to own it. Thank you. We sort of had to own our version of vampires in the hopes that it would play off of the tone of the human characters.
You got another really big, there's another big post-apocalyptic undead show out there. I mean, what do you do to differentiate yourself and to avoid comparisons?
We're hugely aware of that. One thing we have going for us is our vampires have stories, characters, backstories, and needs, desires, plans, strategies, rivalries, conflicts. So instead of a show that's really just human-based and there's this faceless, nameless threat, we're actually cross-cutting our stories between what our human characters are going through as a survival story and as a pseudo-messianic tale of who this woman is and what she represents, and who wants to take advantage of it. Both sides want to use her. She's a nuclear weapon in a movie, so they all want their finger on the button. But our vampire stories I find is just as interesting, because the vampires have created an impossible scenario. By taking over, they're killing their own food source. So they've won the war, they've won the battle, but they may lose the war. So the internal debate and the internal, I guess you could call it, there's a bit of I'm trying to find the word right now. There's a bit of anxiety from the vampires part about how to best play this hand, and different factions have different ideas about what's best to do. So that's different from the other show you mentioned, and I think also because we have a show that isn't a road show necessarily. Our show is set up as a siege show. This story starts already happening, and it's a group of humans who basically created a fortress, and they're defending a fortress. So it's a little bit more. I would actually compare it more to like a medieval story of a fortress that they're trying to maintain, versus the road show. Now, Van Helsing does eventually get out of that model, and probably there are more comparisons with Walking Dead at that point. But I think by that point you understand the mythology so much better that it won't matter. because the other wheels of the bigger mythology are turning in other ways at that point. So you're actually, I want to see more about what's going on with these vampire rivalries and this existential crisis that they're experiencing. So I think that will push people away from maybe the comparisons. I hope.
Well, obviously, you have all that the backstory or the Van Helsing mythology, which people can kind of automatically latch onto, and they've got some kind of handle on the world already. Obviously, vampires, the general mythology of the show. But have you gone for a slow burn, or is it literally hitting the ground?
No, it's a slow burn in the sense that the mythology is revealed slowly over time. The character Vanessa is unaware of her own pedigree. So that's a mystery that is revealed in the season, and what her abilities are something also that is new. So if for us it was really a mystery that we could unravel from her perspective, instead of it being the one who shows up to save everyone, she's kind of unconsciously gifted and unconsciously part of a larger process that she had no knowledge.
Discovering for herself.
She's discovering for herself. So we see it through her eyes, which is a much more interesting way than maybe making her, objectifying her as someone separate from everyone else. She's actually very much debating and struggling with her situation.
Is that why her last name isn't Van Helsing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
She doesn't even know or realize her.
And in fact, I think that since the sales document that went out, we've stripped that from the show entirely.
Okay.
The Helsing name from her previous life.
Okay.
So that's no longer something she's walking around with. It's something that we are going to save and reveal. I mean, it's not something that's a big twist because the show is called Van Helsing, but I think from a character perspective, it is.
Okay.
Of her awareness of this legend. And so it's a much more interesting character beat now than an audience beat.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about, you had mentioned in your panel about a tier for the vampires and their hierarchy. Can you talk a little more about how that
we're trying to make a kind of an anthropological choice about how this could happen and how it would unfold. And the idea that there were, previous to this rising, there was the traditional vampire that we all know that was living essentially in drug dens and hiding, and they were a very small number because they knew that by revealing themselves they couldn't sustain themselves and they'd be targeted and whatnot. So in essence, when the viral cat is let out of the bag, suddenly this takes on different strains and different realities because certain vampires just can't get access to human blood. And so what happens? Well, the older vampires know you don't do these things because this is what happened. But once you have an army of these running around, you can't control these people and you can't control these vampires. And so they become sort of slaves to their hunger. And so these tiers come out of not only a biological imperative, but also the control of certain vampires versus the uncontrolled vampires. So there are the feral wild ones who are under no umbrella of power or organization. Then there's sort of this loosely gang-like group that have assembled together that operate, and then you have a much more kind of intelligent, military almost in their approach in terms of it's almost like a Nazi-occupied Europe, where their human prisoners are thriving and living, but in fences
under the blanket
of vampire control, and that's sort of the top tier. So we wanted a world where vampires themselves have lost control of their evolution in a way, and that was more interesting for the vampire story because now they can't even control their own destiny, and so the power struggle becomes much more vibrant because everyone has a different idea of, well, how do we control this now that we've unleashed it? And not everyone is in agreement, which is fun, you know. So it's like, you know, in a way, it's like a revolutionary story. It's like we've won this revolution. Can we actually maintain it from the vampire's perspective? And it's not easy. And our humans are kind of the wrench in the works. You know?
Do we see as the show goes on about how they took over?
Yeah, actually, in episode 2, we flash back to the events of the Rising itself in snippets, but through the lens of Vanessa's story. it's sort of an untraditional pilot. We flipped it. We start you in the show in episode 1. You have to catch up, and then episode 2 we send you back before everything happened and